Hi, I'm Ben Furman.
And I'm Nate Blyton.
This is Patch In, the show from SoundNotion.tv dedicated to the wonderful world of electroacoustic music. Let's start with some news items.
So first off, Avid has changed their terms and pricing of Pro Tools. They've with Pro Tools 11, they're going to a annual kind of subscription model, it seems. In addition to this, they're adding a bunch of new features, epic numbers of virtual instruments, and uh, really digging in with the 64-bit. They're talking about some new features down the line as they update the software with like cloud storage, different ways of working on the media together. And yeah, I for the first time, this upgrade for Pro Tools is down to $200 for all users of M-powered and old LE in different versions. So like this might actually be in my price range for the first time in a little while to get a new version. So I might even try this one out. But yeah, check it out. We'll have a link in the notes about all the new features and what's going to happen through yeah, with the extended support from Avid as well.
Yeah, this is very similar to Adobe's recent changes to the Creative Suite to make it the Creative Cloud. Some people really like the licensing models, some people really don't.
Lots of people were really angry about the Adobe Creative Cloud stuff.
Yes, and I am already getting kind of angry with Avid for a number of reasons, but that's yet another one that might influence my next DAW purchase. Not that I'm blackmailing them and trying to get free yearly licenses or anything like that.
Nah, we wouldn't do that.
Uh, However, speaking of upgrades, Reason 8 is out, and I have purchased it, downloaded it, installed it, and it is in fact awesome. All of the browser improvements that they were talking about in the promo video are even better in real life. You can just drag and drop samples onto pads in the drum machines. You can just drop loops mid sample. You can drag stuff onto the sequencer and it auto creates and auto routes the device. It's a huge performance and back end upgrade from previous versions and one that I've been waiting for a while. So if you're a Reason user, get it. Also, the two new rack extension amps that they provide are pretty cool. So even more reason to go for it.
Yeah. So speaking of new things, Apple might have some pretty big news today. They're streaming a big announcement today at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 p.m. Post Central or Pacific Time, I guess. And there's yeah supposed to be some pretty big announcements. Some rumors of iPads. Our producer Dave says, and yeah, so check that out.
.10 Yosemite.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're all looking forward for some new news from Apple.
And speaking of high-priced upgrades, if you have $1,500 burning a hole in your pocket, Roger Lin's Linstrument multi-touch controller is now taking pre-orders, and you can order one today at rogerlindesign.com. For those of you who haven't heard about this, the Linstrument is a very large multi-touch controller similar to a iPad or Android tablet, only it's about the length of two of them put together. And it's laid out like a string instrument, although you can change the layout. So you can have a bass layout, a guitar layout, a mandolin, whatever, banjo layout. I don't know why you'd want to do that. But you can press down and hit the equivalent to a fret. It's a grid controller with little raised grid lines on it, and it will allow you to move your fingers over that space and affect things like timbre or the amount of whatever effects you have lined up in your DAW to that particular parameter. So it's a really powerful, really expressive controller. Looks really cool. It's got a great vintage wood sides on the case. I'd love to have one, but alas, I don't have that kind of money. Fortunately, though, for those of you who are poor like me, there is an iPad app called Musician by Rob Fielding that will give you a similar experience. It's free and it's laid out in the same type of grid controller, although this one is specific to the bass and there's no way to change the grid. But you have a lot of different parameters you can tweak and get really cool sounds out of it if you want a similar experience to the instrument.
Hmm. We have some sad news this month as well. UC Berkeley Center for New Media and Audio Technologies founder David Wessel has passed. He was an important inventor or an innovator in the field and pioneered a number of innovations in real-time computer music, and his contributions to what we all do are numerous and very wide-reaching. So he will be missed. Cycling 74 blog has a nice little article, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes as well.
Yeah. Sad news. The interview at Cycling 74 from 2005 is definitely worth checking out, though. Very, very, very interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But moving on, our guest today is Tim Reed from Manchester College. Tim is a composer of primarily acousmatic works. He is the department chair now. He also runs the Manchester New Music Festival, and I'm told has a new baby. So we're just going to refer to him as super busy. So Tim,
That's right.
welcome. Thanks for taking a couple minutes to talk to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start off with all of the stuff you've got going. How do you juggle personal life, professional life, and still find time to compose?
It's tricky. It's really tricky, but and it's a situation that a lot of us composer folks find ourselves in. Folks who are in academic jobs, especially folks who are in jobs at institutions that label themselves as teaching institutions.
Yeah.
And I'm at that kind of place. Manchester is a liberal arts college, and the focus is on teaching. So there's no time for creative work or scholarship that's actually built into my schedule or anything like that. It's encouraged, but you have to find a way to do it on your own time. And at times that's easy to do. At times I can, find good chunks of time to work, but at times like now, as I'm department chair and as you mentioned, have a brand new baby in the house, 3-week-old baby boy, so as well as a 2-year-old at home, and also planning a festival, and it's pretty tricky. So right now I have a couple of pieces that are just sort of on pause, and a couple of pieces that are almost finished, but I know that I'm not going to be able to get to them for a while. And I think that really presents a lot of challenges to composers, because there are a lot of times where I can find a total amount of time per week, of a few hours or something like that, but it's really difficult to find a good block of time where you can really focus. So it's I've got 45 minutes here, I got 30 minutes here, and I think that really affects the way that you work. So anyway, I don't know that my situation is a whole lot different than others, but it's, I think, really amplified right now with a new baby in the house.
Yeah.
So, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, go ahead.
I was curious. You are described as an acousmatic composer. Can you describe tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah, and all those the terms for that kind of stuff are always tricky. I tend to go back to, I still use the term tape piece, even though it makes no sense.
Right.
But it's monosyllabic, so it works. But so I mainly do fixed media stuff. It's kind of weird. I'm a person who I use Macs a lot, and other tools that are really good for doing live stuff. And I spend a lot of time playing in Macs and doing things like that. But I rarely use it in a piece, and except other than to generate sounds that I'm going to use in my fixed media stuff. So I do fixed media stuff almost exclusively. And I think some of the reasons for that is because the type of aesthetic in most of my stuff is I'm kind of focusing on, or I'm really interested in playing with the sort of continuums between kind of realistic representation and abstraction on the other end, and kind of finding ambiguous spots on that continuum, and those are things that you can certainly do in live and interactive stuff. But I think the fixed media medium is really well suited to that. So
Right. On
Yeah.
that subject, one thing that strikes me a lot about your music is the use of samples of live instruments,
yeah.
and that you're not going completely out into the ether and designing
Mhm.
extensive synth patches in Max or whatever in order to create these sounds, but you're using the real instruments. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think that, and that's been something that always I get a wide range of reactions, especially when at conferences and things like that. If you at Seamus conferences and things like that, I think sometimes people are a little bit confused about in my music when I do that because, yeah, for example, in the piece tracings that I sent you, there are long sections where there's just a flute,
Yeah.
uh, solo flute there, and then there's a lot of stuff that's clearly a string orchestra, and I think people wonder why. The question that I get the most is why isn't this a live piece for flute and tape, or saxophone and tape, whatever the piece happens to be. And I think that's what I think is really interesting to me, or why I tend to do that, is because I like to kind of play with that again on that continuum between thinking of uh, sort of where is the piece? Am I listening to a flute piece, or am I listening to a representation of a performance of a flute piece? And then of course there are degrees of processing. Sometimes they're a little bit subtle, and sometimes they're not subtle. And so I like to just kind of move around on those continuums, and I like to stay in a kind of ambiguous place with that. So, and I think if I had a live performer in that kind of situation, it would just completely change the dynamic. It would just really change what the piece is. But it makes it what I'm doing beforehand. Uh, it's especially with people who are from the electroacoustic crowd, with a certain set of expectations. I think uh, I think it asks a lot, tends to ask more questions than it answers.
Now, on that subject, expectations, I've gone to quite a few electroacoustic conferences, and I always kind of see and hear very similar things in there that you're
Uh,
avoiding, like the metallic sound, the wood blocking
uh,
sound, the sort of
uh,
springy sound, and then the let's bounce a sine wave around 8 speakers.
uh.
Is that a conscious decision to move away from those kind of palettes, or is that just a something that you never considered because it doesn't interest you? Or
A little bit of both, I guess. I think when the experience that I have a lot of times when I go to conferences and things like that is I hear so much of those sounds that I just don't really want to. It's hard for me to find ways to use them in my pieces that don't sound like the 10 of the pieces that I just heard.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't really, so I don't dislike those kind of sounds, and I like a lot of the pieces that I hear at Seamus and all that, but uh, and I do use the woodblock and metallic sounds from time to time, but I use them a lot less. Uh, so I know, I guess that's it. I don't really. It's hard for me to find a way to use them that doesn't sound like somebody else's piece, I guess.
Hmm. And especially in this field where we've got the flexibility of making almost any sounds. That's a big task
Yeah,
to try to,
yeah.
yeah, have your sounds be that specific.
Mhm.
It's like
Yeah.
somebody making a solo violin piece. Like if it sounds like a violin, you know, it's a violin piece. Obviously, it's going to sound like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. So, but you said that you sometimes do use like, or I mean, so you said you mentioned that you use interactive tools like Max to generate some of your sound.
Yeah.
What other kind of tools do you use for
Yeah,
generating.
yeah. I mean, specifically in Max, I use it a lot to kind of generate textures and things. One of my favorite things to do in there is, it's nothing fancy, but just to kind of create like just kind of banks of filters and things like that to process sounds. I'll take some kind of ambient field recording type of sound and just run it through banks of filters, like resonant filters that kind of bring out different harmonies and things like that. Um, but as far as other tools, I really mainly use. I mean, I do a lot of time and pitch stretching stuff,
Mhm.
and I just kind of use simple stuff. I use Spear a lot, which if you mess with it enough, it sounds okay. And I use Super Collider, and I used to use C Sound because I'm an old geezer, uh, but I mainly use those to do very simple things like create sine textures and things like that. Um, so
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah, another shout out to Spear. It is such a great program, and
yeah,
to all our viewers and listeners, please download it. It's amazing. You will
yeah,
love it.
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, the
And
main
I used
thing.
to use SoundHack a lot for the same kind of thing, and I still do because you can get some kind of weird artifacts and things like that in SoundHack. But I
Yeah.
mainly use Spear now for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, another one of the lovely things about working with computers, sometimes just like use anything to get some little blip of something, and then that might turn into a whole piece.
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
hmm
Well, you mentioned your piece, tracings. Do you mind if we play a little bit of it?
yeah. Go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, Dave, why not start from the top? Does that sound good?
Works for me.
Cool.
That was an excerpt from Tracings by our guest Tim Reed. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know if that was if that was just on my end, but like some of that gating and stuff. I don't know if that's compression or
Yeah,
something like that. Some of the stuff's
Yeah,
missing, but
I
yeah,
record clean locally, so it'll be all
yeah.
right.
Okay, cool.
yeah. Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a disclaimer we usually give at the beginning of the
Oh
show.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Special processing from Skype or Google Plus
yeah.
will not actually be present in the show.
Yeah, cool. But
Yeah, and it's that's a really interesting piece, and there's a lot of
mm,
space. And so far, as we kind of talked about, it does sound like it could very well be an acoustically performed thing. And where even like the kind of other layers of non-acoustic instruments might happen on a keyboard or something like that, but it would be a very different experience
mm,
seeing people doing that as
yeah,
yeah than giving this, and that's
yeah,
yeah kind of getting into the idea of just recorded media as a different medium than performed music.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's a really, you have different set of things that you can worry about, and like, yeah, I mean, so this as a piece, do you find a difference in how it might be presented, having somebody listening to it at home on their laptop, or as compared to having it be this audio file played back through speakers in a concert hall?
Yeah, I mean, I've found I've had the best responses to that piece when I've had a chance to explain or talk about what I'm going for beforehand, um, and uh, and actually, folks who are not really used to listening to electroacoustic music often respond really positively to it.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, again, that's a kind of a tricky thing where, if I'm sort of asking the listener to listen in a different way, but I just put it up on SoundCloud, and they don't really have any sort of context. I think it can be a little bit confusing. So, it's a little bit like I liken what I'm going for some of the time to a little bit of the sort of emotional effect that David Lynch generates in a lot of his stuff. And I think it's a similar kind of thing where I don't know how familiar you guys are with David Lynch stuff, but I'm kind of
I'm a bit of a
obsessed.
fan.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought I
And
heard rumors about Twin Peaks coming back.
yes,
Yes.
yes. But the reactions to his stuff are kind of similar, or even though, of course, my music doesn't, sound like Angelo's uh, music, but it's a completely different kind of thing. But the reactions are kind of similar, where um, the you get a range of um, that was really weird. I don't, what's he doing, to people who really to people with whom it really resonates, and I think that really is the same type of thing where um, like what he does is kind of creates this it stuff that he presents these kind of situations that are like so normal that they're weird, you know,
Mhm.
and in that you get this kind of intangible kind of quality that I hate to overuse the word surreal, but that's kind of a surreal kind of effect, I think, is what I'm going for. But
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, one thing that strikes
Mm-hmm.
me about both Tracy's and then your other piece, None is Traveling, is the
Mm-hmm.
use of silence and space
Yeah.
in it. That everything is not the kind of Phil Spector wall of sound that you see in a lot of other composers.
Uh-huh.
Can you talk about that aspect?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I think that's just kind of a reflection of my personality, I guess, and my own sort of Buddhist-esque kind of background. I call myself Buddhist-ish, I guess, and I think my music kind of reflects that. I like music where there's room to breathe and room to kind of reflect on what's happening. So yeah, and that, I think, not really so much consciously, but I think that just makes its way into my music, my acoustic stuff too.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a very interesting departure from, like I said, that wall of sound,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that you see in other composers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other thing, talking about None is Traveling, that I found very interesting was the use of, I believe it was a harmonica
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
Um,
it's
it's
kind
just
of my signature instrument, I guess. I don't know. One of my composition teachers when I was at University of Florida just kind of at one point just told me stop using the harmonica because I had went through this, it's like instead of my blue period, I'm in, it's my harmonica period. Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting choice of instruments and one that I am also kind of partial to myself.
Uh-huh.
I've written for it sometimes excessively,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
because you have such a range of things you can do with it that are not necessarily normal in
Yeah.
instruments played.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's the bending, but was that a chromatic harmonica or a just a standard 10 hole?
Yeah, I have a really old chromatic one that I use,
Okay.
and sometimes I mix that with samples, especially because the one that I have is a little out of tune, so it's kind of nice
Right.
I like to combine it, with some just regular harmonica samples.
Oh,
Right.
nice.
Mhm.
Yeah. Would you
Yeah.
do that to like bring out the idiosyncratic nature of your harmonica, or to patch in the different things that were you might consider flaws?
No, I think the interaction between the two,
Okay.
you get all kinds of weird, interference and timbral things that come out of that.
Yeah.
Nice
So,
crunchy stuff. That
mhm.
sounds
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, you also shared with us a piece of yours called Nocturne.
Mhm.
And it's got a sopranino saxophone, Pharrell
Yeah,
Williams, I believe. Yeah, what was it
yeah.
like putting together that piece?
That was a lot of fun, actually. Yeah, and Ben will be familiar with him. Farrell was our feature performer at our first Manchester festival, and yeah, he's a professor of saxophone at school. It's called IPFW in Fort Wayne. It's Indiana Purdue University Fort Wayne. It's one of those combined schools, and he does a lot of new music, and he's great on all of the horns, but his specialty is sopranino saxophone, which as you guys may know, is it's a notoriously finicky and difficult to control instrument. And he's really one of the few people who I've heard who can play that instrument and have it be a pleasing experience. And he really has this gorgeous kind of lyrical tone. But he's I've written several pieces for him, and he's just always looking for new stuff, and he's a great player. And it's fun working with him because he was really willing to kind of collaborate and go back and forth. So that, in contrast to most of the other stuff that I've been talking about, it actually is a live piece for sopranino and
Okay.
tape. So it's kind of a different thing. But other than the kind of tinkly glass sounds, all the sounds in the tape part are sopranino uh, sounds that have just been kind of altered. So
Spirit or
yeah, yeah. So we kind of went back and forth. I send him some PDFs of stuff to play, and then he would record it and send it back to me, and so the electronics part kind of built up that way. But yeah, he's a great player. There's a lot of improvised stuff in the middle there, and he just kind of nailed that. So yeah.
Nice.
yeah. Now it's a really interesting sound though, the sopranino sax when
Mhm.
it's played by someone who can actually play it
Yeah.
and can compensate for all of the idiosyncrasies.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, most of my interaction with that has been just like how hilariously small it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
some YouTube videos of people playing it who probably can't play a saxophone in
Uh,
general.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but when it's in the hands of somebody who can play it well, it has this kind of, I mean, it's of course really similar in its sound to a soprano, but it's like you kind of add a little bit of an oboe-ish quality to it or something. Um, and yeah, it's a nice instrument.
yeah,
Nice.
and the result is a
Mm.
really lyrical sound that you get when you combine the tape part and the saxophone in a live context.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and it's fun, and he really played. We've done that live 2 or 3 times, and it's great every time. So, and again, his strength is lyrical playing. So that's really the piece it's a very simple piece. It's just kind of a simple, nice nocturne lyrical thing. But with a player like Farrell, that's exactly the kind of piece that I wanted to write. So
Nice.
yeah.
And you mentioned in talking about Pharaoh and working with him, the Manchester New Music Festival.
Yeah,
Yeah, could you tell us a little bit
sure.
about that?
Yeah, so we're in the organizing phase of our second iteration. Ben was one of our attendees at the first one,
Yep.
which was small, so it was the Manchester New Music Mini Festival, and now we've dropped the mini because we've expanded it a little bit.
Full
Um,
size. Yeah.
yeah, but it'll be in March of this coming year, and it's kind of like I think of it as sort of like your small town version of sort of the bigger SCI types of conferences. The format's pretty similar. There's kind of a mix of acoustic and electroacoustic stuff.
Yeah.
There'll be probably 6 or so concerts this time, and presentations, probably an installation. And one of the new things we're doing this time around is we have a young composers element.
Yeah.
So there's a young composers competition that we have, and I'm not a huge fan of doing the competition thing, but I figure that's the best way to get young people to submit stuff,
Sure.
offer money. And so we'll have a couple of winners, and their pieces will be presented or performed alongside everything else in the festival. So they'll basically get to be festival participants.
Mhm.
And then depending on the level of interest, we'll have a some kind of young composers reading session, like a workshop in there. So anyway, it's should be fun. We've had a close to about 470 or so submissions so far, which is a good problem to have. But I'm going through most of them myself, or the first kind of cut, and it's with the new baby in the house. It's a little bit.
A lot of time.
Yeah, but yeah. But you really learn a lot too from doing that, going through that many pieces. It's just a good learning experience for me.
Yeah, I'm curious. So I haven't gotten to talk to too many people putting together festivals
Yeah,
like this, especially ones where electroacoustic music might take a big part.
yeah.
What's it like taking in submissions? Do you ask for a specific kind of file format, or how are you working on like how these things might be presented, I guess, down the line?
Yeah, I leave it. So most of the submissions that I have are people either send an MP3, via Dropbox or something like that, or just send me, links to where I can listen to stuff online, which works fine. So I just have, leave it open for email submissions, and basically as long as, whatever way the composers can get, me access to being able to listen to their piece is how we've been doing it. But going through electroacoustic submissions is trickier because you can kind of look sometimes at a score, and if it's really bad, you can tell pretty quickly, or if it's just something that's not going to be playable, or
Yeah.
something that's not going to work. So it's easier to kind of get through some of those first. Weeding out some of the first things that aren't going to work. But with electroacoustic stuff, you really have to listen. You can't just listen to a few seconds of a piece and know, because a lot of times the best pieces, don't really get down to it until halfway through, or it's the experience of how it develops. So you really don't have any other way other than just to listen through it, and
Yeah.
which is fun. It's just kind of a lot of time,
Yeah.
after you get the baby in the bed and listening through
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can
electroacoustic pieces.
Do you find that it's difficult to kind of come up with a programming order once you've started to narrow down pieces and figure out what's going to work best on what concert?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if it's really all that tricky, but it definitely takes a while because you're also having to take into consideration the fact that once you send acceptances out, that there'll be a percentage of people who end up not being able to come. So if you come up with this great programming order and then a couple of those pieces aren't going to be on the program, and there's a lot of juggling around of schedules and things like that because. When you get close to the festival, people have travel issues, and so when it comes down to the final thing, you might have had a great program put together, but things are going to probably shift around. Um, so yeah, but it is kind of tricky, especially for the concerts where it's kind of the hodgepodge of of chamber pieces,
Yeah.
right? Other than a concert that features a specific performer, when you've just got a collection of stuff and finding a way for it to work. And that's also something I have to really think about when I'm choosing what pieces that I want to accept. A lot of it actually comes down to you know to programming decisions and thinking about I might have 100 great solo piano pieces, but I'm probably not going to program that many of those. So sometimes pieces will get accepted, or I will have to reject some pieces, mainly just because I have so many of those types of pieces. Yeah, I don't know. So there's a lot of stuff that kind of goes into it. But yeah.
Yeah, and with the electroacoustic pieces, do you mix those in with an acoustic program, or would you have just like an electroacoustic program where it sit people in a room?
Yeah, that's actually, and I kind of wonder what you guys think about that. As I last time I kind of mixed them together, and I felt like that worked well. But there are kind of pros and cons, I think, to doing both things. On one hand, if you have a separate electroacoustic concert, you can really, I think, set up the space and the listening experience a little bit differently, and you avoid some of that really awful, awkward, like, where'd the performer go? Everybody's looking at the front, especially folks who aren't used to listening to electroacoustic music, and they're sitting there in a recital hall,
Yeah.
just staring at the front of the room, so if you have a separate concert, you can really kind of set up a space. And I've been kind of going back and forth on whether I want to do that. I think I might have a concert for the fixed media stuff where we go over to a different space, and kind of place the audience a little bit differently and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, a different room, like
mm,
a room that's great for a piano might not be as good for stereo playback or anything too.
yeah,
Right. Well,
yeah, and
there's always the issue that having the separate space and the separate concert for all electroacoustic pieces might turn off potential listeners.
yeah, that's another consideration is that, and it happens a lot at some of the kind of bigger conferences,
Oh,
when they
yeah.
have the electronic concert, and a lot of people are thinking, that's the one I'm skipping, if they're not into that kind of stuff, or if you're new to it. If you're kind of new to electroacoustic music, the best way to experience that or to be kind of welcomed into it is not to sit in a room for over an hour and just be bombarded by in the dark, by all this new confusing stuff. So I think especially because at my festival, I really try to invite the community in. So it's kind of a conference. I mean, it's certainly a conference, but also I try to get people who aren't participating in the conference to come as much as possible. So, and I want those people to have a good experience as well. So, and I last time I had a lot of good feedback about that. People kind of liked having the electronics or electroacoustic stuff kind of interspersed with it. So that way you get kind of little doses of it, sprinkled in throughout the festival. But I don't know. I'm not sure yet. I wonder what you guys think as well.
Well, I'm in favor of mixing them, but
Mm.
that's just me.
Mm.
I think, though, you brought up the subject of bringing the community in, and
Yeah.
this is definitely a small town festival.
It is.
Um,
Yeah. It's as small town as you're going to get, I think. So, yeah,
yeah,
Manchester is a tiny town in the middle of Indiana, and with about 6,000 people. And
I think
I
there might
can't remember.
be more
Ben,
than
did you
that on the
spend
way
the night?
No, I had to play a gig in Detroit that summer,
Yeah.
so
So it's like we've got one hotel in town, and it's like kind of a Bates hotel kind of looking place. I mean, it's like and actually, it is kind of like
You tell the experience very well.
yeah,
oh, yes, yeah, it's
it does have a David Lynch quality to it.
yeah, it really does. So, and I think that's kind of the try to just sort of play that up. That's kind of the personality of the festival. Is I try to make it kind of a comfortable, small towny kind of experience. And but yeah, and we certainly have a lot of. I mean, it's definitely not a town where there's a huge new music community, because it's just a little town in the middle of Indiana. Um, so I try to make it a welcoming experience for community members too, because and also for my students, because this is kind of a larger question, but or larger discussion, I guess, is that this festival is really the only time that my composition students or that our music majors really get to be around the kind of people that a lot of us were around in graduate school and things like that, or at larger institutions. So that's a big motivation for me in having this festival, because I can tell my students about all this stuff, and I can tell them about the outside world, but it's really different when you suddenly have 40 or 50 composers here to kind of interact with and learn from. So
yeah, that sounds like a really good experience then for the students. Yeah, giving them the big town feel and the small town package.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I was wondering what's next for you at this point in the short term? Are you working on any projects besides the baby, I suppose?
Yeah, I'm juggling babies. Now, I have a couple of pieces that I'm working on. Actually, both of them are pieces for live performers and electronics, and tape. So one's a cello and tape piece that's close to finished, but now it's kind of on hold for a little bit. And another piece for bass vibes and will probably be some semi-live electronics, but it'll be really kind of like sample playback type of stuff. So it'll be pretty much a instrument and tape thing, but with just a little bit more flexibility.
Cool.
So, and those are both of those pieces are for performers from around here, and we'll kind of record those and sometime at the end of this year when things settle down a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that's one of my favorite kind of solutions, a balance between fixed media and live electronics, is having like fixed samples, but having it be flexible when they happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a really strong thing, and I look forward to hearing these pieces as well.
Cool.
Yeah. You mentioned going about recording them down the line as well.
Yeah.
And recording this like an acoustic part into something where you've been working in the computer for the rest of the part. It must be an interesting process. Like, given your experience working on the saxophone pieces, are you taking any things from that to ideas going forward with these new pieces as well?
Yeah, I actually did the same kind of process where I gave the players. I had recording sessions with the players earlier on, and wrote some things out for them, and just had them kind of play certain pitches that I wanted to. Basically, had them record a bunch of samples and things for me. Then I've done the bulk of the electronics parts, and after that. So yeah, similar kind of process.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Yeah. Now, when you're recording samples, what is your process for that? Are you just going around with a Zoom recorder and then running it into Pro Tools and manipulating them there, or?
Well, it's when it's the instrumental stuff. It's kind of the traditional like studio type of setup, and we don't really have a great studio facility or anything here. So what I usually do is take my mobile stuff down to the hall. But that's just kind of the traditional type of setup. But when I record other samples and things like that, I don't really use a portable recorder too much. So I just do a lot of really awkward, like I've got my interface and my bulky stuff, and I recently there was the house next door. Well, about a year ago, the house next door to us, there was like an estate sale auction kind of thing. So I'm like got my microphone sticking out the window in the yard recording that, and I don't know. So So yeah, I tend to just kind of use my interface and mic and stuff like that. So I look kind of funny with all this
Yeah,
awkward stuff.
it's probably a little higher quality though. Like you could use better mics than what might come on those mobile recorders as well. Yeah.
Use my phone and a USB mic sometimes when I need to. But
Oh, nice. Yeah.
yeah,
Cool.
mm,
Yeah, I
yeah,
just started interacting with USB mics,
mm,
but like into an iPad or an iPhone
yeah,
recently, and it seems like you can get some pretty good gear in that kind of
yeah,
direction.
yeah.
Yeah, a quick shout out. Rode has a really, really nice iPhone mic.
Oh yeah.
I'm told it's basically
Uh,
the NT5's capsules slapped onto a lightning connector.
oh, okay.
Oh wow. Okay.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, sweet.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Are there any other events that we should look out for coming up for you or anything?
Not really. I mean, mainly this festival thing is kind of the big project right now. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, and as Jay Batzner said last week, grading,
Sure.
or last month, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, festivals, grading, babies, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can
Not
imagine.
in that order.
Yeah. Yeah.
grading babies.
Yeah,
This like USDA thing, or
yeah.
Yeah. Like.
That's the worst thing that you've ever said on this show, Ben.
I'm caffeinated. So
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing. And I just I wanted to mention before, as we wrap up, I got a kick out of your website. It's good to see that you had such a progression in your bio of increasing in height and weight
oh
over
yeah.
time.
I just get so yeah after seeing so many of those like bios that are like a parade of acronyms for festivals and things like that. So yeah, my bio just chronicles my height and weight. So
I think it's Danny Felsenfeld, who was on Sound Notion a while ago, told us that his bio used to say, Danny has studied with all the right people, won all the right awards, and acquired all the right
yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
And one of my favorites that I've ever read ended with it was a trumpet player's bio, and it ended with and enjoys writing about himself in the third person.
yeah, nice.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
We should maybe that'll be a future episode where we just talk about everything in the third person.
Yeah,
It'd be really confusing.
yes.
I think we did a Music is Hard about writing bios. Tim and I did back years ago.
Uh-huh.
I'll have to look in the archives for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is it time for the challenge?
I
think
think
it
it might
is.
be about that time.
Nate, you're up.
Cool. So, since we don't have our fancy overlay, Ben, I've got a timer for myself, unless you want to time me or something.
Um, I will trust you, I think,
Okay.
because I don't have a timer anywhere near me.
All right. Well, I promise not to give myself an extra 20 seconds or anything. Um, well, so before I start, I'm just going to say last month Ben talked about amplitude modulation as a synthesis method and other kind of means of dealing with audio.
Mhm.
We got a nice comment from Sam on the post on soundnotion.tv, and thanks for that. So you mentioned FM synthesis, so that's what I'm going to talk about this month. So let me pull up my notes, and yeah, here goes. So FM or AM synthesis is modulating an amplitude to create different kinds of tones, and we talked a little bit about ring modulation. FM synthesis is, second word's the same, modulation, but the first word is frequency modulation. So instead of using a carrier tone with a tone and using a modulating tone to modulate how loud it is, it modulates the frequency of that tone, which it's been used in radio and VHS tapes and more awesomely, I think, in music. Radio, it happened in the early 20th century. Edwin Howard Armstrong invented it, or invented its use in that. Yeah, like I said, it's used in VCRs, but then in 1967-68, John Chowning at Stanford University developed its use in music and using different tones, modulating them against each other. It was patented in 1975 and then later licensed to Yamaha. Yamaha, who used this, if any of you were around in the 80s and 90s, you've probably heard a little bit of FM synthesis. The DX7 was a famous model from Yamaha. It was a keyboard that and there was a bunch of different tone modules as well. But FM synthesis, you like I said, you have a carrier tone that can be like it's often a sine or some simple wave, and then modulating it with another wave, you end up getting like it's really good for developing like bell sounds or metallic or something really noisy. These days, there's a bunch of good plugins and different things, and often in new hardware synths, they'll have either a really rich thing or even just like an FM knob. You could just make it nasty. There's my 2 minutes. But so that's a little bit about FM synthesis. I hope I did okay.
Yeah, the DX7 is easily my favorite synth module from the FM branch in the 80s.
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the greatest Yamaha inventions. So.
Yeah, we were saying at the before the show, like my brother had a DX9 and got to use that a lot in high school, and we had a TX81Z little rack mount thing. A lot. This is, I guess, just an aside. It's lovely using some of the software these days because you have a pile of knobs, and access all the different things. Where so much of this hardware had like 4 buttons and a menu or something, and you had to go through and really spend a lot of time just dealing with the interface.
Yeah.
Well, and I know in Reason they have recreated a DX7 as a module. Rack extensions.
Mm-hmm.
I know.
I've not played around with yet, unfortunately.
Yeah, Native Instruments has a great plugin as well. It's the FM8 or something like that. There's this other one I found online. OXE Music Software it's either Oxy or OXE FM Synth. It's free for Windows and has a VST plugin and a standalone application. And this one in particular, it's got so most FM Synth has like the concept of it is you got a carrier tone and modulating tone, but a lot of these synthesizers would have more different tones, and they call them operators when you've got so many of them.
Yeah.
You can
The
get
2-minute challenge seems to have expanded into like synth nerd out time.
Yeah, exactly.
Which
so
I think is
challenge
perfectly
format
appropriate.
left or whatever. Yeah.
The challenge is not to explain FM synthesis in 2 minutes. The challenge, rather, is to not get into a total rat hole of, oh man, remember this awesome synth?
This is like the Oprah after the show part.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well,
I did not mean that to mock you guys or ask you to stop. Just simply an observation.
Yeah, Tim, do you have any good FM stories? We got.
I don't.
No time like the present to make one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is a nice PSA. If you haven't yet, go spend some time with a good FM synth. It can really enrich your life, I think. And if not your life, at least your electroacoustic music. Although you'll end up with, you mentioned those sine tones bouncing all over around the bell tones. That's like straight up FM stuff, So,
it totally is.
Right.
But it was such an iconic sound in the 80s.
Right.
When I first started messing around with synthesizers. So, of course, the first thing everyone wanted to do was, how do I make this sound that you hear on this album?
Yeah. And it famously used, I can't remember what the piece was, and it's embarrassing, but Radiohead sampled a iconic piece of electroacoustic music for their song Idiotech.
It's Mild und Lease by Paul Lansky, which in itself is a sample of Mild and Lease from Act 3, I believe, of Tristan and Isolde by Richard Wagner.
Yeah, so this piece by Paul Lansky is an iconic use of FM synthesis, and it's
Inception.
Sorry.
Inception, right? That's what happens when you sample a song, and then that sample is used in sampling another song, and
sample within a sample. Yeah, exactly.
It might be in samplation, but
all right, end the show. Just broke the rig. all down.
Well, I think Dave might be right. As our producer, he's pulled the plug on that pun. So, uh, Tim, thank you so much for joining us, first of all.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. So.
Yeah, we're gonna have all this in our show notes as we do each month and as we do on all our shows at SoundNotion. But check out SoundCloud in particular has some nice stuff. SoundCloud.com/Tim Reed.
Mhm.
Tim Reed Music is another place to go learn all about his height and weight and different different things.
It's fascinating, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks again for joining us. And this has been another monthly episode of Patch In, uh, our electroacoustic and electronic music and everything electronic and techie show from SoundNotion.tv. You can please check out all our shows at SoundNotion.tv. We've got a bunch of other good material up there, and we're gonna have we do show notes on that website at soundnotion.tv/pi. You can find out. We'll be posting links to all the different things that we talked about and get some more detail. There's also an opportunity to contribute to our show in the form of we've got some donation fields as well as an Amazon affiliate link or something, or it's a search box. And so if you got something you were going to buy anyway, if you get it through that site, we get a little bit of a kickback. It's a nice way to support the show. Other ways to listen to the show are we're in the iTunes store. Any way you get a podcast, you can search for us and find us there. But thanks again. We're going to have another wonderful show next month. And my name is Nate Blyton.
I'm Ben Furman.
And we'll see you, I guess, in November. Yeah, see ya.